Good afternoon. This is Dan Grazier, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Hey man, thanks for coming on the show. I love talking baseball. I love talking spying. I love talking strategy. I love all these wonderful things we get to do. We've talked in the past about Afghanistan back when we were trying to stay and figure things out, and we didn't figure that out. One of the things I've noticed, especially with this modern Ukrainian Russia war, is that, and this is just a fact. A lot of people make a lot of money and have a lot of influence because they have desperately wanted and written about the war against Russia for decades. And so it's almost like their influence, their ability to sell these ideas turned into big decisions in terms of weapons systems, plans, strategies, war, all these things. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I am saying that every time someone says there's a failure of intelligence to see something, it's also a success in info operations. Like there's two sides to all of these things, right? So you're writing about Taiwan and China. I'm more in your side of the camp, like, hey, how the hell are they even going to pull this off? But you hate to be wrong. And why is there no okay, let me start this with this. Why is there no professional cost for being wrong? Like, hey, if you build this thing, this is going to happen, then it doesn't happen. There's no professional cost for that. And if you just keep saying something horrible is going to happen every day of your professional life, eventually you're going to be right, even if you were wrong most of your career. So I don't know. What is your take on that? Like, how do we deal with these things and think tanks and et cetera, when they put these papers out, it all can be well researched. And you and I both we'll know very smart people who are very well researched who completely disagree with us. Hey, Dan, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, Pete, that's a great question. I've always kind of wondered the same thing. Like, why are there no professional costs here? I think a lot of it just kind of boils down to um, is a failure to really hold people accountable. I mean, I occasionally will call out someone if they put out like a particularly unfounded take. But until people start losing their jobs, I suppose, for being wrong and for really bad takes, then it's probably not going to change.
If I know one thing about think tanks, and I'm not present company excluded, I'm not saying this about any one place. Well, maybe I am one, but not your place. Uh, the more you go, the more foreign money gets in there, the more influence happens. And again, these folks aren't registering as foreign agents, but they sure as hell take foreign money. Why is it that the think tank class get away with taking foreign money and then taking foreign positions?
Well, that's another great question, and it's you know I think it kind of differs from shop to shop.
Hmm.
But I mean, for the most part, the think tanks are. I mean, we are like private entities, and there are certainly rules that we have to follow as far as maintaining our tax exempt status. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of times when there's foreign money that comes into places, and not always for nefarious purposes. Full disclosure, there are some programs here at the Stimson Center that take some
Sure.
foreign grants. My project does not. We definitely didn't for this program, for this project specifically. But yeah, it's kind of it's an interesting loophole that exists here in Washington. Where you know where a party line can be pushed by somebody that doesn't appear to be adhering to the party line, and it's through those kind of means. So
Yeah.
it's just one of those. It's one of these things that, as a consumer of information, it's kind of incumbent upon the readers to understand you know, where the funding comes from for particular projects, so people can gauge what levels of credibility to assign to it.
Yeah, and the political influence that goes with all of that, political lean and everything. I'm pretty hard on the Atlantic Council. I'm open about that because I see the money they take, I see the positions they take, and all of a sudden, certain oligarchs are better than others. Certain, artists are better than others because they're aligned, and the money is flowing in ways that make me uncomfortable.
I mean, it's hard to blame me for being uncomfortable.
Okay, now that we covered that, because I want to start there because it's hard with the think tanks, and I want to hold us all to a higher. I'm not part of a think tank. I'm trying to start one, but here I am being a hypocrite. But it's hard to find the money, and if you don't find money, you don't get to go to do research or all these other things. And so it is a challenge, and it's a place where there are experts, but when the experts say this is the way to go, we're stuck, right? And it seems to me that if we say this is the way to go and this is the way focused on threat, boy, we just take off in that direction fast as we can. When I don't know that we fairly assess these threats. I remember one of the reasons why I sort of left all that work was I got tired of constantly being worried about who was going to try to kill me, or being told who was trying to kill me more accurately. Oh, well, here come the whatever. And I'm like, hey, stop. Like, like I just every day, every threat, all the time, high posture. The threat posture is never below screaming red. Ah, it gets silly. So I wanted to start there because it is hard. It is hard to go in. And so, how do you, when you look at the Chinese Taiwan potential for threat, how do you uh, hold yourself to account? How do you question your findings so that we can trust you guys, the Stimson Center, all these? How do we know that? What's the bona fides in your work?
That's an excellent question, and it's one that we thought about a great deal as we were designing this project. Mostly, we assembled the team that we did just because of our relative expertise. So, like, I was I was the lead author on this project, since it mostly focused on the possibility of an amphibious invasion of Taiwan. I was kind of the natural person in Washington to do this. I was a tank officer in the
Mhm.
Marine Corps. I was a
Yeah.
graduate of Expeditionary Warfare School, so I was a fully qualified amphibious planner once upon a time, and I understand the kind of ground combat that it would take to conquer and occupy a place like Taiwan. My co-author James Siebens, he's written a book about about Chinese coercion. My other co-author McKenna Rollins, she accompanied me on my last research trip to Taiwan back in April. She has a master's degree in Chinese politics and economics from University of California, San Diego. So she understands the political and economic considerations of this. So we put together a team that has the relative credentials, credibility, expertise to put something like this together. And then we talked about this project a lot with a lot of other scholars here at the Stimson Center and at other places that have expertise in this, just to bounce our ideas, like our theories about this, just to get their take. Once we finished our research and we put the draft together, it was extensively reviewed by both peer reviewers and our editors,
Yeah.
just to make sure that we weren't missing anything. So there's a lot of academic rigor that goes into a project like this. This was a long time in coming. I've been doing research on this project for nearly 2.5 years
Yeah.
to reach this point. So, it's uh, that's the background of it. Now it's up to the readers to take a look at the report, and I challenge everyone to tell us where we're wrong and what we
Yeah.
what we might have missed.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. And this, for the audience, is I'm not challenging Dan. I'm illustrating the complexities of writing these things, and then when we consume them, because I guarantee you right now, I can read a very compelling, well-researched, peer-reviewed paper that says the Chinese are coming, the Chinese are coming, and so this is the conundrum that we sit in, is like we have very smart people who disagree significantly, and how do we now marshal our assets, right? One of the things within your paper, I know from my own academic writing, it is one message in a cable of messages, and so you have to account for, like you were saying, I have to make sure I cite so and so and so and so and so. Like, they're required. Like, if you don't do that, your paper's not serious, right? So you have a lit review that you have to do, and all of a sudden, like, the space for your thought, it shrinks, and in your opinion, oh, that's just a little tiny strip at the end of the whole thing, right? And so you're just laying out your case, and when I read the paper, I read it with an open mind, I understand, but like, almost the first thing you do is you say, if then this, like, if you start with an if proposition, or something like that as part of the premise, everybody, and so you're already like, we're in this world, and then can we go forward from here, and what does that look like? And so even then, like the message is very singular in these papers, and I guess and you want to write 100 more pages, right? I mean, it's a 36 quick read pay, but you can never say everything you think you need to say in there because you are limited by either an unnatural word count or just what you can legitimately and academically put into the paper.
Well, that last point is very true. I had to switch offices right now just because there's some construction going on next door. Because if I was in my office, I would pull out the binders of research that I've put together, and I would
Right.
show the entire shelf of secondary sources that I read in the course of putting this all together. This is a fascinating project, and I freely admit that when I started this, it was back in February of 2023. I did not know all that much about Taiwan. I could point to it on a map.
Hmm.
I knew like a lot of the history about how the current situation, like originated all the way back to like 1949 and a little bit before that. But I didn't know all that much about the actual island itself. Like, for example, I certainly didn't know that Taiwan had the tallest mountains in East Asia.
Yeah.
I didn't have much of an idea at all in it. And so as I started really researching this, there was a lot to this story and to this whole issue. And there have been whole books written about Taiwan and about about the history, and I would have loved to have gone into more detail on a lot of these things, particularly Operation Causeway, like that whole episode. If you want to talk about that in World War II and the
Sure.
planned American invasion of Formosa, there was a lot to this, and I had to leave a lot out because we were trying to make a very specific point,
Yep.
and we were very concerned about that point getting lost in the larger historical context that we all three of us really wanted to include. So it was a challenge. It was the
Yeah.
ghost of Mark Twain. Sorry this letter's so long, but I didn't have enough time to make it shorter. It was kind of a similar situation where we
Yeah.
really had to work. And it did. It took longer than we expected to really concentrate our argument into a product that's as easily digestible as possible.
Yeah, boy, you said so much there, and I swear we're going to talk about Taiwan and China, but this groundwork, this stuff you have to understand. It takes years to do these things, and so you have this greater message now that you'd like this, right? And so like in my world, from what I was doing, talking about our incapacity to win with these modern fights that we had. I could spend the next 20 years writing the perforated story of all these singular thoughts because even in a timeline, it's like, okay, now you understand this part. Now I'm going to write this one. And there is no story gap here. Right. Like, and so like you just write what you can if you desire to, if you get paid to. And if you don't, like, I don't get paid to do this stuff. And so I do it, but it's exhausting. And then you write it and then no one cites your work.
Hmm.
so one, thank you for doing all this work and learning all about this stuff because yeah, I didn't know about the tallest mountains. I didn't know that, and when I started reading the paper you taught me all kinds of things, and I like you, I feel like, oh, I know where they are, I know how wide the strait is, all these kind of things. You start digging it deeper, like, holy shit. And by the way, anybody watching, when Dan talks about his credentials being a Marine, oof, uh, he understands what it's like. And just for everybody watching again, not that long ago, we put a bunch of Marines off the coast of San Diego and they went straight to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. That shit is hard. So
Yep.
Dan understands what that means. And once you get there, let's say you survive. Oh, it's gonna be nasty. You can't put enough commanders out there because they're just gonna get, especially in this modern day and age of drones and long range
Right.
sniping from civilians. Good grief.
Hmm.
Let's dig in.
Well, yeah, there's a whole bunch there. I'll tell you one of the moments when when this whole project really kind of solidified in my head was the first trip that I made to Taiwan. It was in October of 2023, and I was down around Tainan, and I was just kind of walking around, just trying to get a feel for the place, and I ended up like the there isn't a lot of separation between like the city and the urban and the rural in Taiwan. They kind of back right up against each other. So I could walk around the middle of a city and then I could like all of a sudden find myself standing right next to a rice paddy. And I was walking on one of these roads that kind of that ringed a number of agricultural plots, which again in the context of Taiwan were rice paddies. And I suddenly realized I almost had a flashback to my deployment to Iraq in 2007. I deployed, I commanded 2nd Platoon, Bravo Company, 2nd Tank Battalion. I had 4 tanks in and around Fallujah. And there were a number of missions that I had to do where we were operating in some of the irrigated farmland around, that flanks both sides of the Euphrates River. And those areas scared the snot out of me because one, we'd lost an entire tank crew the year before when they came off a bridge at night and they flipped the tank upside down in a canal, and all 4 of the crewmen died. And so we were all very mindful of that when we were on these elevated roads where I had a canal on one side and I had irrigated farmland on the other. I definitely didn't want to flip into a canal, and I really didn't want that tank to go into that irrigated farmland because I would have gotten mired. And I realized, wow, this is exactly like this whole country in Taiwan, or this whole island of Taiwan, where military operations would go on, is exactly like that farmland in Iraq that was so treacherous to us in the tanks.
Yeah, man, we saw, anybody, and I'm not a tanker, but I know tankers, and I know what you guys go through when they were talking about the Russian tanks being on Hardball Road. I'm like, of course, because if you drive through a farm, your tank's going to break. If it's not in 5 minutes, it's for sure in an hour. Like shit's just going to break. And all of a sudden, you're better off going down a single targeted road in a lot of cases. Because, yeah, now you're talking about marshland or irrigated farmland or a canal. They reached a point during the Iraq fight. You and I both remember this, where it was like, hey, everybody slow down. Don't drive fast at all. Don't turn your MRAP, because those things will just flip and just like a giant mailbox rolling down the road or something. It was so dangerous to drive these machines that we have. You're right. And then when that happens, that takes a lot of resources to go after that crew to try to save their lives, try to extract them, all these other things. Maybe China won't do that. Maybe they'll just keep on driving, but there's a cost for that as well. And so, yeah, that experience, and I've worked in the wetlands on the Tigris side, and you're right. It was hard to walk through some of those areas.
Right. Yeah. Imagine, the only way that a place like Taiwan could be conquered and occupied is with a lot of heavily mechanized forces. It's the only way you're gonna knock down a Taiwanese city. And even then, it's a ridiculous proposition to contemplate, because Taiwanese cities are very dense and they're very, very big. And so the size force it would take that the Chinese military planners would have to plan for, because they have to plan for the worst case scenario, is beyond comprehension. I mean, you're talking millions of soldiers, and it's just not a very realistic scenario. And it's a bunch of like simple things that I think most people can really wrap their head around. Like a tank can't go through a rice paddy, just can't. The fact that those rice paddies are wide open, like there's no cover and concealment. So anybody like trying to attack across the landscape of Taiwan, in the places where they would be able to do it, would be under fire like the entire way, because what isn't flat and covered in rice paddies is covered in mountains, and those mountains are almost always visible, off in the distance. And so you have defenders overwatching, these wide open fields of fire through across which an attacker would have to travel to get to their objectives.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you get a chance to engage with their forces? Like how competent are their artillery guys? I mean, because that would just make everything horrible. Can you imagine 80 to 155 raining down on you? Oh my God. It would be you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't be able to go anywhere. You wouldn't survive.
Right. So I didn't engage with a lot of Taiwanese officials, and I did it for a very specific reason, which was namely I know exactly what I was doing there, but I also understand what it appears like. I'm a bit of
Mm,
a shadowy American military figure who's like bumbling around like another country trying to figure out how to invade it.
yeah,
So I was kind of cagey about, what I was doing,
yeah,
when I was over there, because I just didn't know how people might react, how officials might react to my presence there. Plus, I didn't, there's a number of other people who have done research into the relative competency of the Taiwanese military forces. What I was really interested in is what does this look like from like a Chinese military planner's perspective.
right.
It's the old turn the map around principle that like every military officer learns at some point. Because that was something that was always that I, I I always saw that as being lost in the conversation here in Washington, about this issue. Because presumably, like the American response in this scenario would mostly be, in the like in the air and at sea. But the Chinese military planners would have to think about the the war on the ground because wars are only won on the ground ultimately.
Right.
And an invasion would involve putting a lot of soldiers on the ground in Taiwan. And I never heard anybody really talking about that in any great detail. So that was what we really focused on. Was I mean, we had to, we had to talk about how there's all kinds of there's a strategic reason why the Chinese aren't likely to do this, namely the risk of nuclear escalation. There are political and economic concerns that the Chinese leaders would have to consider as well, because there would be major costs, political and economic costs, were they to launch an invasion. And we make this point in the report that the practical military considerations, and I argue this vociferously, like I think the military argument against the invasion is actually the weakest of all four of them, but it's
Mm,
still a really strong argument, and it deserved a whole lot more attention than it was getting throughout about a decade's worth of inflated rhetoric here in Washington, claiming that the Chinese are poised to invade Taiwan at any moment.
let me go back to how you start this whole thing. If China was to start massing troops, and we're talking biggest invasion of all time,
Yeah,
along the coast, there's just no obscuring that. Not
no,
anymore, you know?
no, no, it would be impossible for the Chinese to hide those kind of preparations. Because you're right, they would have to move all the ground forces towards the coast,
Hmm.
to their embarkation point. They would have to, move the ships in place, to start loading up all these forces. In the 21st century, with satellites and I mean, there's submarines that prowl those waters, and signals in intelligence, even like open source, reporting. Yeah, those kind of preparations would be impossible, to hide. And
Yeah,
so, and it would give the defenders on Taiwan an opportunity to get everything staged and ready to go, and like any allies of Taiwan that would care to get involved and intervene, it would give them time to move for to position forces.
yeah,
Because it's not something. This is not something the Chinese would be able to throw together at the last minute,
yeah,
and it would be very difficult for them to make these arrangements and make it look like it's anything other than what it is. Which you're
right.
right, it would be the largest single military operation in history, and yeah, there's just no obscuring that.
Yeah, and you and I know like the amount of time it takes to get everything in position. In the civilian world, it's like, oh, they'll just go. Like, no, no, you know, uh, you got to be able to feed people. You got to be able to fuel things. You have to have tents. You have to have all this stuff, and that means it's all right there. Even if it's not on the front line, you know, an infantryman, a parachute guy. Well, how many rounds of ammo is he going to carry? Is he going to carry in 1,000? Where's he going to put it? Where's he going to carry it? Oh my God, you can't do that. So all of a sudden you realize like just the amount of provisioning that takes place, all of that, it just takes an enormous amount of time to do that. And maybe it can be staged further away, but you still have to have air superiority to rely, or maybe at least air dominance. I don't know, to get it into the area. All of that takes months, months and months of planning.
Right. Yeah. I'm now thinking of another like visual aid I could have used to illustrate this point. because I saved an operations order for an exercise that I wrote for First Tank Battalion. It's
Yeah.
about like 10 years old now. It's a 1 inch binder, big stack of papers
Yeah.
like this,
Yeah.
and it was for a 4-day exercise. It
Right.
took like that much planning and that much information,
Yeah.
to put one tank battalion. It wasn't even a full tank battalion. It was only 3 tank companies,
Yeah.
for Steel Knight. But it took that much planning, and that much like logistics, like everything,
Yeah.
just to put part of one tank battalion out in the field for 4 days.
Yeah. Jeez. Yeah. You're right. I mean, yeah, we would go to the field to do our stupid spy exercises, but actually pretty fun. And months of planning. And look, it's not intense planning for a war, but still months of planning. We had to write roles and all this other kind of stuff. But yeah, it takes a lot of planning to do this. And is it not true that if China was to do this, we could put an enormous amount of pressure on them and really cripple their ability to move fuel and just starve them of petrochemicals because those things there's no way to stop that. We can just destroy any kind of. I mean, you put put a fuel farm together. Everybody in the military, when you want to store a bunch of fuel, you get giant like Ziploc bags. These are industrial. I'm kind of exaggerating but that's what they are, right? And they're
The
just
big
packed
fuel
with
bladders.
yeah, they're called fuel bladders, right? And so this blivet farm, it, choo, 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 like and that's it. Like
Yeah.
it is just it goes up, and that's that part. You attack any kind of pipeline, anything you want, and they don't have the luxury of having a lot of on hand oil, and even then they still have to be able to move it in trucks and everything else. It seems. It just seems impossible to be able to do all the provisioning you have to do to put that force on the water and get them across and then survive and then provision them there.
That's exactly right, and you also have to think about it like this too. I mean, it wouldn't even take like a military blockade to disrupt a lot of those shipments, because I promise you, in that part of the world, like in those waters, if a big military operation, like a big shooting war kicks off, then can you imagine the CEO of Maersk, being willing to send his ships like into an active war zone? It's the same thing with all the tanker vessels as well.
Hmm.
I mean, it would disrupt the global economy, because you just think about like the
Yeah,
the percentage of global goods that gets shipped through those waters. Like all of that would be disrupted.
yeah,
Nobody would be sending anything to China, or very few people would be willing to run their ships through those waters.
yeah,
Um, yeah, there's just all kinds of there are so many different reasons like against this scenario, that when you really think about it, it really does not seem plausible, I think.
yeah,
you know
yeah,
and it's been interesting, like as I've socialized this idea, when we were putting the whole proposal together. I would get people immediately, like their first reaction is, well, of course the Chinese want to do this because everyone's talking about it. And I said, really? And I start going through a couple of these things, and it only takes me like 3 minutes to convince somebody that, yeah, you're right, that is really ridiculous, because I've never really
yeah,
thought about it like that. Now I will add this one caveat. I always have to, I should have done this a little bit earlier. So I fully take Xi Jinping and the other, Chinese Communist Party leaders at their word that they want to gain full political control over Taiwan. Like, I
sure,
believe them when they say that. The argument that we're making is that they're just not going to use military means to accomplish that.
yeah,
If the
yeah,
Chinese happen to gain full political control of Taiwan eventually, they're going to do it in a way that looks a whole lot more like they gained political control over Hong Kong than it's going to look like the Allies, evicting the Germans from Western Europe in 1944.
yeah.
So yeah,
And this puts us right back in the whole like the eye of the strategery storm because yeah, I agree with you. They're not going to fight the way that we want them to fight. And because we know how to defeat that. We just spent half an hour talking about it. It's like that's not going to happen. And as much as I think we were needed some reform at Secretary of Defense's office and in the Department of Defense slash now war. Um, yeah, okay, we're going to get back to winning. No, you're not. No, you're not. Who's going to line up tank for tank with us? All of this. Yeah, okay, great. You got rid of some bad, sociological I don't know, experiment problems that were there. But we still got our ass kicked the last couple of wars, and they didn't want to fight with us toe to toe. They fought in a different way. And you and I have both seen it. I was in the Alpha Palace. It looks like Space Command, everybody. And there's a zillion dollars in TV sets. There's 250 years of college degrees sitting in that room, and one Korean era rusty used bomb that may or may not have munitions in it shut that entire place down as they're like, oh my God, there's a bomb. And then woof, this quiet comes down and they're all working, but just an old piece of obsolete stuff could go boom, could not. We don't know. It doesn't matter. The entire place pays attention, right? And so it's not hard to see where we're weak in these kind of conflicts.
No truer words have ever been spoken, and it's been a big theme of my work over the last 10 years, 10 plus years now that I've worked in Washington. It's, the side with more technology is not the side that's going to win. And like moving forward, I think it becomes less and less true. Or I think it becomes less and less true, the assumption that, the side with more technology is going to win. Because the other side, usually the way to defeat high technology is through really low technology. You look at the back and forth fights that we had in Iraq and Afghanistan with IEDs. We kept coming up with these crazy, like, fancy tools to try to, detect IEDs, including jamming our own communications when, we put those jammers on, to thwart the remote controlled IEDs. Well, what do the bad guys do? They didn't come up with better remote control IEDs. They made like wooden ones that our metal detectors couldn't find. And so we're just driving over these like really unsophisticated explosives, but they were perfect to defeat all the high technology that we were employing against them. And moving forward, you think about all the cyber physical systems that we're doing, the whole, the network on the move, like the Internet of Things, like all of that kind of stuff. What we're doing is we're building in the means of our own defeat. Because the other side that's going to go up against the United States, you're right, they're not going to try to go tank for tank with us. They're going to disable our tanks remotely with some 19-year-old hacker on a laptop by disrupting the vehicle's operating system now. Because I challenge you to take a look at the new design for the upgraded Abrams that General Dynamics is talking about. Like we tout these things like they're like it's like we're being really smart, like, oh, we're going to pack all this technology into this gear. And no, we're just building in the means of our own defeat. Because all of that, anything that touches the network, if it isn't already hacked, it will be hacked. Because we don't own the electromagnetic spectrum. We just don't, and we're not going to be able to control it. And we cannot assume full unfettered access to the electromagnetic spectrum in a conflict where another human will is trying to defeat our human will, and they're going to find every possible advantage they can.
We open 2+ counterintelligence investigations every day against China. Every fucking day. If you all think that we're going to go fight those guys with tanks, it's not going to happen. They're going to do something else. They're insidious in that regard. And so when I think about Taiwan, and I was going to ask you about this, but before I get past this, I wanted to ask you this, because in your lit review, I saw a name that I was interested in, because I've read some of his work. Marcus Weisberger is another guy. I don't always agree with what he says, but when we talk about nuclear capability, we're talking about escalation, and that brings a lot of attention to a potential fight. This current president is doing his best to kind of tamp that stuff down, but could Joe Biden have dealt with that? I don't know. And so in my mind, this is not a political statement, but if you have someone who seems soft or incompetent or possibly demented, the risk goes up, because now China's like, now's the time to strike, while America is, got this guy in charge. And I don't know that anybody would have been able to prevent some kind of interior attack that China might have pulled off against Taiwan.
Well, I mean, alternative history is always an interesting topic of discussion. That is a challenge. To try to war game out all those scenarios. That piece that you referenced that I cited in the report from Marcus, it's an important one. It's a story that he wrote. I think it was back in like 2017 or 2018. And it was just positing the question after, after a strategic level war game about like, can two nuclear powers fight
Right.
like a conventional war against each
Yeah.
other?
Right.
And there's a lot of evidence that suggests that that's not the case. The Reagan administration conducted the Proud Prophet exercise back in 1983, and that was and all that was, well, at least as far as we know it was, because the whole thing is still classified.
Right.
More than 40 years later, it was just it was national level leaders that just did a bunch of war games where they played out like different little triggering scenarios, like a civilian airliner gets shot down. It was things like that. And like nearly every time, a crisis like that led to a full nuclear exchange and
Mm.
relatively quickly. And it
Yeah.
was so like the results of Proud Prophet were so stunning. It reportedly it scared the snot out of President Reagan, and like a lot of his rhetoric started really changing after
Yeah.
that. And again, like the full report is still classified. And there have been a lot of other like war games, scenarios since. And in Marcus's piece, about that, he quoted, it was an army general who had participated in one of these war games, and he talked about how, yeah, it's this is a scenario that we really don't want to have to, we really don't have to play in real life, because it's very dangerous. And it's kind of like the old Matthew Broderick War Games movie.
Yeah.
The best
Do
move is not
you
to
want to
play.
play a game? Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's the whole point of this report is we
Yeah.
just want people to stop and think for just a little bit about this,
Yeah.
because I don't think it's very likely. I don't think the Chinese are, I don't think they want to do this. I honestly, I don't think anybody in the United States wants to see this, scenario pop off. And I can guarantee you the Taiwanese people do not want, China and the United States fighting over their little island.
Right.
But history has shown repeatedly that arms races and belligerent bellicose language being traded back and forth, when given enough time, that tends to spill over into an actual exchange. So my
Yeah.
concern is that in all the posturing and theater that goes along with this. And here in Washington, a lot of this is being played up just to justify really really big defense spending.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
but there's a possibility that this gets out of control, and it's a very real possibility. And then, even though that nobody wanted to fight, that we might end up having a miscalculation and then blundering into a fight when we really didn't need to. That's one of the proximate causes of World War One.
Yeah.
It was an arms race, and there was a lot of politicians that were talking tough through July 1914, and no cooler heads prevailed to stop things. Next thing you know, 16 million people were dead.
Yeah. Yeah. And that whole thing, 'cause I'd read that paper previously just by accident, and then I saw that reference. I thought, oh, yeah, that's cool, because you're right. It is, we're in a spot right now where there's a lot of nuclear capable countries in fights. And why not put a low grade nuke or a high grade nuke, into this fight if you get to a spot where your back is against the wall? And for sure, here's the other thing that's crazy is basically all of the leaders of those countries are likely not to get elected again if they had a free and so talk about back against the wall. And then what happens if Putin doesn't get elected again in his next thing? Well, he's probably, because he's dead. And so you can see how all of a sudden these things turn into something awful. And so I'm glad you referenced that, because the nuclear thing is something that I normally go, calm down. But there are scenarios where these things happen. And before like we get to like before we let those colonels and those generals make the right decision when it's button pushing time, let's understand that my former commander, my buddy Eric Kleinsmith, him and his team, the Able Danger team, had a good fix on the 9/11 attackers before 9/11, but because of the law at the time, they had to get rid of they had to sit there and they had this conundrum, and they didn't know 9/11 was going to happen, but they knew there was something going on, something being planned, and they had to take all that data and putting it in my hands here, and they had to throw it away because legally they were required. And that was one of the things Congress came and talked to them later on, and it was because they followed the law, they got rid of something, and something horrible happened, partly because of that. And it wasn't their fault that 9/11 happened, but that is a leader following orders, doing what is legally required, even if they knew that there was a risk of doing that, something bad could happen. And in this case, it did.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah,
It,
yeah,
these yeah, these things can take on a life of their own, and which is why it's really incumbent for for leaders and policymakers to just be mindful of this stuff.
yeah, yeah,
This this isn't a game. This is deadly serious, and I mean, this is gonna sound a little odd considering that I basically write term papers for a living. Um, but these aren't like simple like academic exercises that we do for that we do for our own interest,
right.
and our own intellectual satisfaction. You know, politicians, up on Capitol Hill,
Hmm.
staffers there, policymakers in the Pentagon, like they're dealing with very serious, like deadly serious matters, and we have to have cooler heads prevailed.
Yeah,
Just with the weapons that we've built for ourselves, like these scenarios can get out of hand,
yeah,
and the consequences are just absolutely catastrophic. Anybody, if you doubt me, read Andy Jacobuson's book, Nuclear War Scenario. She did a lot of research on that. That's a and that was one of the most terrifying things that I've ever read.
mm,
Just because that is plausible, and there are certainly some people who think that it's becoming more plausible by the day.
yeah. Well, and again, this is that battle of threat versus promise, and where do we put our resources? And you're right, we keep making better where we're tanks, but to what end? Especially if you can make a mechanically guided, not computer guided drone and have it come in to interdict all of our comms for at least a short amount of time. You don't have to be successful at this, everybody. You just fly a drone into a battle space and we're going to lose our minds or shut down operations and try to figure out what's going on. It's crazy how impactful it can be. During the Gulf War, we were able to light out all the satellites above the Iraqis and send them back in time so where their comms were runners back 2000 years. It's different now. Now everybody can have comms and you can broadcast and you can do all kinds of things with the electromagnetic spectrum to confuse an enemy. And I don't know how you get dominance in that realm. Did you guys consider this at all in your paper? The advancement, I call it the democratization of war.
We did to a certain extent.
Okay.
I mainly focused on the worst case scenario because that's what's most often cited in Washington as certain sectors of the national security establishment are trying to coax more money out of Congress, for their own for their own ends. Like they
Yeah.
cite like the worst case scenario. So we definitely looked at that, but we also addressed the fact that the Ukrainians effectively limited freedom of navigation in the Black Sea to the Russian Navy, and they did it without having a Navy fleet of their own. They did it through like shore-based missiles and like uncrewed like surface vessels,
Yeah.
and so because technology like has changed, and this is something we directly address in the report, that the the successful prospect of the Chinese invading Taiwan actually gets less and less every single day,
Mhm.
almost, because as technology advances, the kind of like big traditional weapons that it would take to affect a successful invasion of Taiwan gets rendered less and less relevant by new technology. Like imagine a big troop ship carrying like 1,000 Chinese Marines,
Yeah.
coming across the strait, and it gets sunk by a $5,000 uncrewed surface vessel.
Yeah.
Um, like the math just doesn't add up, and so the the idea, people throw out the 2027 date, and I almost wish I added a line in the report about this. It's that imagine how much technology is going to change
Yeah.
in the now year and a half or so, less than a year and a half, I suppose, until 2027. I mean, it's dramatic. I mean, technology has changed like a ton here just in the last 5 years or so. Imagine all the advances in uncrewed systems that the Ukrainians have employed and developed over the like during that time.
Yeah.
And the Taiwanese are paying attention to this, and so like they can certainly employ those kind of means. But the Chinese would still have to employ traditional means in order to achieve their strategic objectives. Like they would need a huge surface fleet to to move the hardware, people, and supplies it would take to sustain operations on shore. You can't
Yeah.
fly that much equipment in. You can't fly that many people in. You can't fly that much fuel in. You have to bring it across the surface, which means that you have all these troop ships and supply ships that have to cross better part of 100 miles of open sea, dodging torpedoes from submarines, missiles from aircraft, and rockets from the shore, plus any number of uncrewed systems that are going to be launched towards them.
Yeah. Yeah. We could turn the map back around and allow the Taiwanese to be concerned about their own survival. And so, what do you assess? What's their capability, not only to defend, but to do offensive operations? I mean, look, I'm a spy guy, so okay, I'm going to send people over there, and I'm going to find out who likes ass and titties and money, and I'm going to compromise people. That's what I'm going to do. And guess what? People like ass, titties, and money. So I'm going to find some level of success, or I won't. But the next guy's right behind me doing the same thing.
Right. That is something I thought a lot about that. I thought about it when I was on the ground. I've spent 20 days on the ground in Taiwan in the course of doing all my research for this, and it's an interesting thought, to think
Mm,
about like the lesser means that the Chinese might employ to gain full political control over Taiwan, and it's an interesting thought experiment from an American perspective,
right.
because let's say the Chinese were able to conduct some kind of covert operation that topples the Taiwanese government and facilitates a more relatively peaceful coup, to gain that political control that they want.
Yeah.
What is the American response at that point? Do
Yeah.
we invade Taiwan to evict the Chinese from Taiwan, and then put the Taiwanese government back in place? I don't really think so.
Yeah.
And if the Taiwanese can be toppled that easily, then were they really worthy of our support in the first place? I'm kind of going off script here a little bit with that, but I
Yeah.
mean those are like real considerations that people should think about here.
Yeah.
But instead, all official Washington wants to do is they want to focus on that very narrow scenario, very
Hmm.
unlikely. I think
Right.
it's theoretically impossible
Right.
scenario of a big, massive amphibious operation like the world has never seen before. And
Sure.
that's what we're going to focus all of our efforts and all of our resources. Like,
Yeah.
next year, we're going to have a $1 trillion defense budget.
Yeah.
And the main justification for it is the Taiwan scenario. Um,
Yeah. Crazy. Yeah,
right.
it's true. I mean, I gave you an example. I had in mind Taiwan infiltrating China, but China's going to infiltrate Taiwan just as they're going to find a way to do that. And by the way, we're trying to find a way to infiltrate both, because if we can get someone in their parliament, get, compromised. And yeah, so there's a competition for these people. And that is a form of conflict that I would say, like, you have to win the fight. Well, obviously militarily, right? Otherwise, you can't hold the space. But politically, religiously, socially, culturally, all these things are means that we don't even like to talk about. What do you mean religious? There's a separation of church and state. Well, we're in a country where the word Islamic Republic is in the title of the fucking country. The other one that we're in has got Allah Akbar. And I say this all the time, but there's not a separation of church and state in most of the world. And so if you can use religion to win, why wouldn't you?
Right. Yeah. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. The United States is
Yeah,
really good in the physical dimension of war because that's where the money is.
yeah,
And we like building things. We like spending money on fighter jets and tanks and ships, and And because again, that's where that's where the money is. That's where the political power comes from. When you are out here and you're making these more like soft power, moral mental dimension arguments,
Yeah.
you almost see people's eyes kind of
Yeah.
glaze over because there's no money in it. There's no political power to be derived from it.
Yeah. I can in 5 years for less of a cost than gosh, an Abrams tank, I could train you up 1,500 to 1,000 spies who are capable in that language and we can just gently infiltrate and then let's just see what happens for nothing. There's no money at all. Like you just in 5 to 10 years you'd have an operational network in Taiwan. China might be a little harder, but it's still doable. And so, yeah, we never want to talk about that. We never want to talk about the fact that we bleed all this talent. We train all these counterintelligence people up and field collectors in this back. Sayonara, hey, good luck being a forklift operator. We don't ever keep
Yeah.
these people. And so, if China had a more aggressive, which obviously they do, approach to gathering information, they can have a robust presence in any nation on earth. And I'm going to add this to it. The other day, before they blew up Qatar, the Israelis were like, no one at the negotiation table has a rabbit up their hat, in their hat. And then they're like, nah, yeah, you guys do, because they always do. And Mossad always has one. And so why wouldn't Taiwan have a rabbit in its hat? Why wouldn't they have a guy somewhere high, well placed in Xi's government, able to do anything at a moment's notice? We don't need to do it now, but we got the person, whatever that can be. And you see what the Israelis have done. It's remarkable. And then what that does internally within a place like China, how many Chinese get killed because there's a successful operation and they don't know who the Jew is in that group? I kill them all, right? And so you can quickly destabilize. Things get saucy. You can, if you have a good intel operation, which why wouldn't the Taiwanese have that? But you can quickly destabilize the co-belligerent to the point where they're they're not able to reliably operate.
Yeah. Well, especially considering that the culture involved was the same culture that produced Sun Tzu,
Yeah,
who taught us that the art of war is to achieve your strategic goals without fighting.
yeah,
Uh, that was something that was never ever far from my mind as I've been working on this project.
yeah, yeah,
Because what gets talked about here in Washington goes against like every single bit of like Chinese military culture.
yeah, yeah.
Because this is not what they do. I mean,
No,
think about the last time. Like name me a country that China has colonized. Throughout like 5,000 plus years of recorded history. Like
yeah,
they don't.
they
That's
don't
not
do it.
it's not part of their it's not part of their tradition. That's what
Yeah,
we do. And like we project military power all over the world, but the Chinese don't do that. And because they're I don't know, like it's just not part of their tradition. Like their tradition
right.
is all right. We're going to achieve these goals without fighting,
Yeah.
which that's quite frankly that's a pretty good starting point.
It's a good starting point. I don't want to run out of time without talking about the Formosa invasion that was planned. Talk about that a little bit, and just in general, just I get an idea what that looked like for us.
Yeah, so Operation Causeway. This is another moment when I came across that staff study from 1944 that really kind of solidified this whole project in my head. Because you're right, there was an idea during World War II to capture Formosa or Taiwan today and use it as an unsinkable aircraft carrier for follow-on operations against the Japanese homeland, or home island. And so there was a big staff study that the Department of War and Department of Navy put together. It was mostly military planners in Washington. It was Operation Causeway, and what they envisioned was a 9-division invasion of Formosa, and they even had the units identified for it, and they showed where they were coming from and like how many different like vessels were going to be involved. If I remember correctly, off the top of my head, it was more than 4,000.
Hmm.
Um, but it was like 9 divisions. Like a World War II division was about 20,000, about 20,000 soldiers, and so it was a massive invasion force. Now you gotta think about this in the proper context. So at the time in late 1944, when they were contemplating this, and the operation was going to happen either at the end of 1944, beginning of 1945. that was the height of American military power. Like that was as big as the U.S. military ever got, and it was also a very experienced force by that point. Like the people who were going to execute this were the same people who had conducted big, massive amphibious operations all over the Pacific. So they had relevant experience that they were building upon, and that they were going to employ capturing Formosa. So we had the people with experience, with the equipment in place, ready to go to do this.
Wow.
Now, the Japanese forces on Formosa at the time numbered less than 100,000. That was and most of those were administrative staff, because the Japanese had occupied Formosa for nearly 50 years at that point. And so there were only about a third of the Japanese personnel on Formosa at the end of 1944 were actual combat troops. So you're talking about like a little more than like 30,000 soldiers, like Japanese soldiers. We were going to send 9 divisions against them to conquer this place. But even still, American military planners looked at the challenge of invading Formosa and said, no, we're not doing that one. We're going someplace else.
Yeah.
So
That's crazy.
Right. Like
if there was a time in history when it was possible, but eliminating all these other things, you're not worried about another nation, you're just going to go do it. They still said, no.
Yep. We're going someplace else. And that says a whole lot to me. I remember it was a Tuesday afternoon that I finished reading that report, and when this all struck me, I said, "Yep, I think we're really onto something here," because that's really, really telling.
So when we hear a radio host talk about the invasion of Taiwan and all these things that we hear about all the time, what are like the 3 bullet points that we can take assurance in? Like, hey, Dan's looked into this. This is just not going to happen.
Okay, so the 3 biggest ones. Challenge them to explain. Okay, how did the Chinese bring the force necessary to conquer and occupy Formosa across the surface of the Taiwan Strait uninterrupted? How do you do that? The second one is, how do you move massive, and I'm talking massive, mechanized armor forces across open terrain that is mostly restricted to them because of the rice paddies? That's the second one. And then 3, where do the Chinese come up with a force of probably like millions? Like I will be conservative and I will say 2 million. Actually, I think it's a lot more than that. But let's say 2 million soldiers that it would take to like fully conquer and occupy Taipei. Taipei is a crazy big city, and it is completely surrounded by mountains. So even just getting to Taipei is nearly impossible. And then when you actually see what the city looks like, trying to actually, like penetrate that and eliminate resistance in that city is an almost impossible task.
When you talk about naming echelons, right? Like everybody, like this is just rough math here, but a battalion is 1,000 people, a brigade is 5,000 people, a division is 25,000 people, right? And then we start running out of things to call things. So then we just start saying it's an army.
Yeah, it's an army group.
Yeah, it's a joint task force or whatever it is, and we don't have like that's how big and incomprehensible your number is like millions. That's a national invasion force, I guess. I don't mean it's just, there's not, it's so big and you can't even comprehend how many people that is. 100,000, we can wrap our head around that. That's an army. Okay, great. We got 5 armies in there. Oh, okay, great. But millions is bananas. Yeah, who commands that? Jesus.
Yeah, right. I mean, one of the best comparisons that I could like come up with just to try to illustrate this point was the Phantom Fury 2, the big battle of Fallujah, November 2004.
Yeah.
That was basically like a reinforced division level operation, to knock down, to reduce a city that had largely been evacuated, of about, I don't know, what is it, like 5 kilometers square or something?
Yeah, it's not big. Yeah,
it's not that big, and it's about like 3 or 4 stories tops. And it took like a month to do that with with one division. Taipei is a city of 7.5 million people, and it covers 250 like square kilometers.
Right.
Yeah, and it's huge. I mean, it's those buildings are all like 20 plus stories. It seems.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
yeah,
Boy,
it's
then you bring
insane.
in John Spencer's work and talking about high-rise urban operations in modern war, and yeah, that's some crazy fighting there. I mean, it's nuts. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so we've been here for about an hour, and I really appreciate you coming on, man. It was really fascinating to talk to you about this. What else do we need to talk about? What do you want to close on?
I I really I just want people to think about this scenario a little bit. The next time you hear somebody throwing out China's going to invade Taiwan by 2027, I just stop and think about this for just a minute, and you will realize that it's just not realistic, and there are real consequences to this. Not only are we bankrupting our grandchildren, preparing to fight a scenario that isn't even theoretically possible. The next time we have to go fight someplace, and the United States will go fight another war someplace, but it's going to
Sure.
look a whole lot more like Iraq or Afghanistan. But we're going to try to employ a military force that we designed to fight China in the Pacific, in that scenario. And so
Yeah,
we're going to be using very expensive bombers and very expensive munitions, to blow up tents in the desert someplace. And so we're going to lose again instantly in the moral dimension of that conflict. And so we're actually in preparing to fight this very unlikely scenario. We almost guarantee that we're going to lose the next war that we actually do fight.
yeah, yeah. Boy, we hate to fight the fight that's not going to be like we want the fight that we offer, but no one wants that fight. They fight us in different ways. Everybody, look, Stimson.org is where you find out more about where Dan works and the work that they do. And then also, here is the link to the paper if you want to get a little smarter on that. When someone's like, China's going to invade Taiwan, then send them and have them read that paper or reread it and get a little smarter and understand this. Anything else you want to say? Ask anything I should have asked you? Anything you want to ask me?
No, but I've been hugely enjoying all your baseball posts recently.
Oh yes, good. I love it.
Although my
Check out.
Nationals are struggling this season.
Yeah, but you know what? They got that Wood dude, and he's awesome. You just need one or two more guys, and you're relevant.
Yep.
So it's great. Well, thanks for that and the baseball thing. I appreciate it. Everybody else, I'll see you tomorrow. I'm going to be on the road in San Diego talking about some jiu-jitsu stuff. You guys will dig that. Dan, I'll say goodbye to you in a second. Bye-bye, everybody.